Changing podcasting for the better starts at home. So what can you do specifically to help other local people around you not just understand podcasting, but actually make podcasting better? Hello and welcome to another podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. This week it's all about what you can do to help podcasting be better. Not your show, but overall podcasting. And today we're going to go local. We're going to go local because, well, for the most part, we're local. Now, squelching your concerns right away. You don't have to have a local podcast to do this. Again, it's worth repeating. To be considered the local expert, as well as be a local advocate, you don't have to have a local podcast. You really do not have to have a podcast that is local to your neighborhood. The reason you can become the local podcast advocate is because you're a podcaster. You see these people. You're in the same area of them. You don't have to focus on the local business to be a local podcast advocate. Why is that important to be a local podcast advocate? Well, it's so much easier, I know, to just get online and spread good podcasting tips and practices and be seen as the expert. Join the Facebook groups that hundreds, if not thousands, of other people belong to. Jump in Slack channels and tweet and join Twitter chats and all that stuff. And that's great. You should do all of those things. But there's an even better opportunity, I think, to be considered the local podcasting advocate / expert. Because when you join those Facebook communities, those online groups, it's filled with people who want to express their expert opinion about podcasting. But when I show up to events in Phoenix, Arizona, where I happen to abide? No, it's where I happen to live. I'm the only podcast pro. I'm not always the only podcaster, but I'm oftentimes the only professional podcaster, if you will. Certainly the local advocate. No one's really talking about it. So that's a great opportunity, I think, for all of us to advocate, proselytize, if you will, on a local basis. And I've got 3 basic places where I think you can do that if you've never done it before. Number 1 is check around and see if there are any local podcast meetups. When I came back to Phoenix a year and a half ago, not quite, there was one podcast meetup, and it was kind of fading out because it had kind of ran its course. But I attended that podcast meetup. I now run a sort of quasi-podcast meetup called Phoenix Podcast Club, phxpodcast.club, if you're curious, where I'm trying to act in that capacity by running my own event. But that's Phoenix. You may find when you go look at your own city on meetup.com or wherever else local meetups happen, that there are already Facebook groups. There may be the Podcast Brunch Club active in your area. Join that. Be a part of it. And if there is not one, if you've looked, not just at meetup.com and the other Podcast Brunch Club, but other places, if you have looked and there isn't one, start one. Why not? It'll be 1 to 2 people joining for a while, maybe you, your significant other, and then it'll grow. It will continue to grow. I promise you that it'll grow over time. That's number 1. Now let's go to the other extreme of that one. What if you could become the local podcast expert / advocate for your local news stations? On television, Evo? I stand behind a microphone and talk. I don't get on a camera. Your news outlets, if you live in any sizable metro area, you've got at least 3, probably 4. All of them are hungry for local news and information, not just blood, guts, and gore. They need to show the human interest side. They need to show the interesting side. And if you haven't noticed in the last 18 months, podcasting has been in the news a lot. The news organizations want to give those national stories a local bent. And they need someone locally to talk about that. That can be you. That can be you to reach out to your local stations, say, hey, this big announcement that just came out about, let's go back in time, Spotify's $300 billion investment. Wasn't that much. I'm a local podcaster, and I can tell you what that means to us and what that means to the future, because podcasting is here to stay. In fact, your station might even have a podcast. It's a way to get on the TV or the radio if you want, but I think the TV is probably the more applicable place to go, like the little morning programs. Yeah, you got to get up early. You got to look nice. You got to go to the station. But it works. The other thing to think about, if that's harder for you to do, are just regular local networking events that have nothing to do with podcasting. I'm attending a couple of events right now. Well, not right now I'm talking to you, but soon after I leave, I'm going to head to one networking event that I've been going to for the last several months. And I have already become the podcast guy. Because that's what I go talk about. When it's networking time, and people say, what do you do? I launch podcasts. So it's an easy story for me. When you go to these local networking events and you start talking to people, you're going to talk about your podcast probably, and you should do that. But don't only talk about your podcast. Make sure you have some facts and figures in your back pocket that talk about how podcasting is growing, how media attention is back on podcasting once again, and how you want to help spread the good news of podcasting. Yesterday, I talked about having those shows in your secondary app so that you know what shows to recommend to someone when you're at these local networking events and someone asks really what they should listen to. This is your great time to do that. Because it's hard sometimes to talk about ourselves. I know it sounds weird, it is. But we can talk about the things we're passionate about, which is the podcasting space. And these people at these networking events may not know they want to hear about it, but I guarantee you, if you bring up podcasting, people around you go, oh, I listened to X show or something else, or I heard about this thing, and you can become that advocate. And if you do that on a regular basis, don't just show up once and do this. But if you show up on a regular basis to these other non-podcast networking events, or if you show up on a regular basis, if you become the go-to person for your local news channel when it talks about podcasting, which is going to happen, and there's more announcements coming. And if you can get this big podcast group going in a meetup of some sort locally, if you can do any of those things repeatedly, not necessarily week after week, but on a regular basis, so you show up, you do the work, you're helping spread the good news of podcasting. You're there to answer questions, and you're there to encourage people to check out the new, cool, best way of doing things. Remember, you're not there just to say, it's so easy to make a podcast. You can say that, but then on the other side, you need to say, but it's hard to do it the right way. And it's important we do more podcasting the right way. Be a good advocate when you're out there pushing podcasting. Remember, you're pushing advancing podcasting. You're trying to advance podcasts. You're trying to make this whole thing better. We need more people listening to really great shows. Some of those will turn around and start becoming content producers as well. Those are my ideas on how you can become the local podcasting advocate, no matter how big or small the town that you live in. Oh, here's a tip. If you're in a really big city, like New York, and there are lots of other people, you don't have to do it city-wide. If there are lots of other podcast experts, you don't have to do it city-wide. Be hyper-local, if that's what it takes. Be hyper-local if you need to, if there are other people in your space. Thanks once again for watching, everybody. Hey, by the way, if you need some help figuring out how this works for your business, get in touch with me, because launching podcasts for clients all around the world is what my team and I do. Evo at podcastlaunch.pro reaches me, or go to podcastlaunch.pro to see a list of the services that we are offering clients around the world. I shall be back tomorrow with the conclusion of this mini-series right here on Podcast Pontifications. Cheers.